I heard Zane was working on the pitch for South Park Studios, so I walked over there when New Vegas was wrapping up, and I was like, "That's cool. Can I work on that?" So I was like, "If you guys need an animator, I'm totally down to work on that." Because I've never worked as professionally. I've never worked in 2D before, but I did a lot of 2D stuff in college, and everybody's a fan of South Park. So I mean, I was like, I cannot pass up the opportunity to work on South Park, and it just kind of went from there. I just started on the project and uh, studied South Park, watched so many episodes. I was getting like QuickTime cutscenes and QuickTime videos and stepping through them frame by frame. And I was like totally over analyzing the South Park show. And I was like telling them about animation techniques that they use. And they're like, "Oh, really? I didn't even realize that. We just animate it." Well, actually, when we first started working with South Park, I think they were in the process of going back to like their first like season 1 to 4 or something like that. And finding all their old Maya files because they were like creating their own library of stuff. So as they were creating the library, they were sending us like dumps of files and episodes and stuff. But usually how it works is like we'll have a shot where we want to do like a specific animation or a death or something, and then we'll be like, "Hey, do you guys have a episode from the show that you can think of where this kind of death would work for our game?" And then one of the guys at South Park will send us email back with Maya, like with that shot. He'd be like, "Oh, what about this?" And then we'll have the Maya file with exactly how they did it on the show, and then I can give that to one of my animators, and then they can like break that apart and figure out, okay, how do we make what worked in the TV show work in the game? We have to make a whole tool set for 2D animation. So because we have the engine that Obsidian made, that they're on it, the Onyx engine that we made for Dungeon Siege, that just came out. But then we had to like twist that engine around to get it to work for South Park. So we had to figure out how to make a rig like you do in 3D games, like with a skeleton, and how you get the character art to fit onto the 3D rig. So we had to get the same idea so we could make a walk cycle, and then we can make like all the main kids like Stan, Kyle, Cartman, Kenny all fit on the same rig, and then we take that rig and we make tons and tons of animations for it. Sometimes I'll go a little overboard in trying to mimic things because we're trying to mimic the TV show, and it's like they have 15 years of the show, so these guys are like they're pros. So trying to do something that somebody's been doing for 15 years, you want to be as accurate as possible to what it is and to the story, So with the walk cycles, their walk cycles are 2 frames down, 2 frames up, 2 frames down. But they animate their show on 24 frames a second. So we couldn't get our engine to render at 24 frames a second because who wants to play a game that runs at 24 frames a second? So everybody wants 60 frames a second, but we went up to 60 frames a second on our game, and it looked like nothing like the show at all. It was so weird. It was just strange, like combat and stuff. Everybody was like so super smooth and sliding. So we tried kicking it down to 24, which we kind of got a good result, but there were a lot of situations when you're like pressing buttons and stuff, and you're not getting as accurate as you can. So we went to 30, but then we had the problem of the walk cycle is not the right speed as the show, and like Matt and Trey are very particular about how their walk cycle works. So South Park Studios actually took their walk cycle, and then they went back and forth between Matt and Trey, and they ended up figuring out that they can do 2 frames down, 3 frames up, 2 frames down to kind of like incorporate like the 3-2 pull down that happens from film when film goes onto a television show. So they kind of incorporated that so our engine would render with we could animate everything as a 3-2 pull down to fake the 24 frames a second in a 30 frames a second show. So like everything we animate, we always go like 2 frames of a held pose, 3 frames of a held pose, 2 frames of a held pose. But that's kind of like super like in depth and studying the show and the style and all that stuff. If you do an RPG, there's a lot of lines. And with South Park, in order to kind of make it feel like South Park is like the VO, like all the lines, and it's all Matt and Trey's writing. They do all the VO for everything. So we had to have a way to efficiently get all of their lines into our game and get it in there quickly. So we used a procedural dialogue generation tool. It's pretty common in games, but we had to make it work for South Park. So South Park Studios sent us a sheet of all their mouth shapes, and like these are what we use, and there's like 15, and half of them are smiles. So there's like probably like 11 mouth shapes. So we went in and took our procedural dialogue tools that we used on like Alpha Protocol or New Vegas or Dungeon Siege, and we were like, okay, and then we just kind of got it to map onto the South Park mouth shapes. So when we worked directly with South Park, like we'd show them the first version of the generated lip sync and stuff, and then they'd be like, "That's cool, but this mouse shape's not right here." And we'd be like, "Okay," so we changed some like procedural animation generation rules from our tools guys. We'd be like, "Well, we need this to change," and he'll think about it, and he'll be like, "All right." So he has this crazy, complicated like sheet of like this phoneme matches to this mouth shape. But if you see this phoneme, it'll use this mouth shape. But if this mouth shape was right before it, it'll show this mouth shape instead to kind of like fake as quickly as possible hand-keyed animation. I went into animation because I love animation. So like the ability to go through a sequence of animation and watch it and enjoy it, and then go back in and watch it again, and then be like, oh, I really like how they did that animation. Then you just go individual frames and just hit the arrow key over, and just be like, oh, okay, I see what they're doing here. Oh, I know how that worked. So I feel pretty lucky being in that position, and like, you know, having watched the show for, you know, 14, 15 years, and now actually have the opportunity to work on stuff they do for the show, and I can still like use the tools that I've learned as a video game animator for like, I don't know, how long has it been, 6, 7 years now. So that's pretty cool.